How would you define imposter syndrome?
Yeah, so for imposter syndrome, I would say it's the feeling of being in a position that you don't deserve, right? That's probably the most basic definition that I could think, right? One that you think you don't deserve. So you've convinced yourself, I've been faking it this whole time and now I'm here, kind of like that classic line on your resume, but getting the job anyway type of feeling. That's probably the best way I can describe imposter syndrome, but it's really that perception that you're not supposed to be there. It's typically isn't factual, right? You do deserve to be there, but something within you is just telling you, I don't deserve to be in this space, in this meeting, in this classroom, in this job, in this position. I just got lucky.
Mm. Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Detour to Destiny podcast. I am excited because today we have Gianna from Mosaic Counseling. She is a master of social work as well as a licensed social worker who specializes in cognitive therapy and faith-based therapy. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay. So actually we met. So I was cruising through Instagram and I saw some posts that she posted that actually helped me. And I was like, okay, I really like her post. And then I kind of looked through the page and I wanted to reach out because I felt like based on the content that you would have value to add to the viewers. So just to kind of make this make sense, um, the podcast is all about, so it's called Detour to Destiny because it's all about making sure that every episode provides roadmaps so that people can get from wherever they are to the ultimate goal of where they want to be.
Mhm.
So you and I talked before, and then the goal of this podcast is to, or this episode is to help people navigate from imposter syndrome, fear and anxiety, those two things specifically, and helping them navigate to a place where they actually can start and operate in whatever that gift or that goal is. But before we get into that, I want to ask you some questions. So, what made you dive into therapy, social work?
Yeah, so I always joke I started being a social worker when I was 12. It was just always something that I was kind of naturally drawn to, helping people. I loved listening to people, making them feel heard. And that's just kind of what I've been doing ever since, right? I couldn't picture myself doing anything else.
That's awesome. And then, what do you say gives you joy about being a social worker?
Ooh, it gives me joy. I love that question. I think when you talk to somebody and you're really able to make them feel understood, I'm very much a body language person. So I can see when someone's shoulders drop. I can see when someone sits in the chair and they find that ease and that peace and that understanding of kind of the common human experience. So if you sit on my couch and I'm able to see that I've kind of lightened your load a little bit, that's one of the best feelings in the whole world.
Oh, that's awesome. Is there anything that you have ever like coached yourself through?
Ooh, absolutely. I think whenever we start something new, it's a little scary, right? There's always the negative thoughts that come first, right? Unfortunately, instead of the positive ones, just because our bodies and minds always like to keep us safe, typically from any feelings of shame, guilt, and vulnerability. So I think when you start anything that's new, whether it's a school, a job, a career, right? Especially after the pandemic, a lot of people change their jobs. I know that's a very common topic for people. So just coaching yourself through being new, right? And we will get into a little bit of that imposter syndrome a bit later and being able to come out on the other side of it, hopefully more confident in not only the strengths that God has given you, but the strengths that you've cultivated yourself.
That's so awesome. Okay, so I like to talk to people specifically or directly as we can. So I think the first group of people that I would like to talk directly to would be anyone watching who is suffering from imposter syndrome. So I kind of want this segment to just kind of identify what imposter syndrome is, the obvious definitions, and some of the not so obvious symptoms of imposter syndrome that we may not be aware of. And with the goal being to help them identify with it and then to get to the point where they felt confident enough in themselves to start the business or to do the open mic or to apply for the job, or to approach the guy or the girl that they like. Just let's just first, so from your professional definition, how would you define imposter syndrome?
Yeah. So for imposter syndrome, I would say it's the feeling of being in a position that you don't deserve, right? That's probably the most basic definition that I could think, right? One that you think you don't deserve. So you've convinced yourself, I've been faking it this whole time and now I'm here, kind of like that classic line on your resume, but getting the job anyway type of feeling. That's probably the best way I can describe imposter syndrome. But it's really that perception that you're not supposed to be there. It's typically isn't factual, right? You do deserve to be there, but something within you is just telling you, I don't deserve to be in this space, in this meeting, in this classroom, in this job, in this position. I just got lucky.
Mm. What would be some common reasons that you run into that people feel like they don't deserve to be there? Like, what are some common reasons that people give themselves, that internal narrative that makes them think they don't deserve to be there?
Yeah, a lot of the times it's lack of confidence in yourself, sometimes even low self esteem. It's a lot of comparing outwardly to other people. So you're looking at kind of whether it be social media, it'd be outward performances, and that's your basis of reasoning. When in fact, we all have stuff that goes on below the surface. Social media is like rose tinted glasses, right? Nobody posts negative things on social media. It's all happy, positive things. So again, going back to that perception of everyone else could be so much better at this than me, and I don't deserve to be here.
And two, when you talk about social media and just media in general, I notice that a lot of times what we don't realize as viewers is that a lot of things are edited for entertainment. So they will like romanticize or over exaggerate the person's genius or, the wins or the support system that they had. And sometimes we look at what other people have achieved and we kind of feel like, yeah, but they were like this genius kid. For example, like my background is in IT. That's a big place to have imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
right? Especially when the narrative around the thing is, it's like in IT, it's the nerd with pocket protector back, you know what I mean? Or the person who is the genius that is exceptionally intelligent, who scored the highest,
Together,
yeah,
knows
like
who you are.
scored
Yeah.
the highest on their IQ test and college entry test. So there's like a perception sometimes that surrounds different careers too, that I feel like can make us feel like we don't deserve to be there. So how would you help someone? That's a sneeze. Okay. How would you help someone suffering? Let's say someone feels like they don't have the skill set to apply for a job. How would you walk them through that? I feel like I don't have the skill set to apply for this position, but they actually do have it, but they're afraid that they're going to come across something they don't know how to handle.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So, one of the benefits of our practice is that we are a strengths based practice, right? We focus mainly on strengths and highlighting what you already have to help you kind of move forward. So, there's a lot of different ways that you can do that, whether it's worksheets, whether it's videos. I let my clients choose how they want to have the conversation. But I like to ask what their strengths are in three domains, right? So the first one is personal relationships. What strengths do you bring into those? Then I ask about your profession, your career, right? Sometimes people have more jobs than just one. So what strengths do you bring there? And then finally, what kinds of strengths do you have based on hobbies? And how do those show up in your life? Because a lot of the times, as we're going through our day to day, we really go through a lot of strengths, but they're just so present that sometimes we forget how truly special they are. So to sit down and kind of have a non-biased third party remind you of those, that can be very empowering and very uplifting. And then if we wanted, we could go even more technical to say, okay, what are you anticipating is going to happen in this interview? And how can we prepare so that way you feel your most confident, most actualized self?
Mm. Would you do that too, like, once they're on the job? Like, would you ask, like, what do you foresee may be an obstacle that may come up while you actually have the job? And then they will kinda work through that as well?
Yeah, and see how realistic that fear is, right? Sometimes people are very rational with their fears. Sometimes they can be a little more on the irrational side, and that's okay. So, a thing that I say a lot in practice is wherever there's smoke, there's fire. So, if you're worried about something, it's typically attached to something else. Could be bigger, could be smaller. But I always like to kind of go down that rabbit hole, so to speak, to say, okay, well, what if your worst case really did happen, right? Is that something that you feel confident enough to get through, even if it may be uncomfortable? And working through, again, reminding that person of those strengths. So, with that worst case scenario, they can still
Mm. That's awesome. So, like, say for example, if my fear was that they're gonna assign me to a project and it's gonna be written in some language that I don't know, and I'm deathly afraid of that. So, what would that framework look like for me? Like, would how would you walk me through that, like, specific? So, would it be me like identifying my strengths of something I've overcome before? Like, what would that be?
Yeah. So I think you started off great. So, okay, when have we been in previous situations like this? And how have your strengths helped you to overcome obstacles in the past? And not only that, a big strength is recognizing where you need help, where you need that guidance. So, if you don't know a coding language, but this whole program is going to be in a coding language you don't know, how can we reach out and ask for support? Because we also don't want to create the narrative that we need to know everything everywhere all at once. It's just impossible, right? Only God can do that. So for us to have that expectations of ourselves, that can also be really difficult. So then I would say, okay, is there anyone on your team who can help you out with this coding language? Are you connected with your supervisor or a manager? How could you go to them for extra support or help, et cetera, et cetera?
I think there's power in what you said about having an expectation that we have to know everything. I think that's a really like a golden nugget, like let go of the expectation that you have to know everything about anything that you're going into. So I think that's like something that I would really like to highlight that you said, well, everything was good, but that really stuck out for me. Cause sometimes I get stuck in a loop where I feel like I need to know everything going into it. So just being reminded of that would be something I feel like should be like a keychain or a, like a poster on the wall. Like
Oh,
I
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. What about fear of but that brings us to another thing though. Sometimes we're afraid to ask for help because
Mhm.
asking for help feels like being found out. So
Right.
how do you address that?
Yeah, and that definitely comes in with the imposter syndrome as well. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword of I don't feel if I deserve to be here, but I also don't want to tell anybody that I feel like this because then, like you said, absolutely have that found out feeling. So another thing that I talk about a lot in practice is reinforcing the idea of common humanity. So you are not the only one ever who's going to feel like they don't know anything at all. You are not the only one ever who's not only not going to know who to ask for help, but maybe what kind of help to ask for, right? There's so many swirling conversations that can come up to where sometimes you just feel paralyzed by choice. So let's say you have two choices in front of you. Maybe it's asking for help or not asking for help. Or maybe it's one of those situations where both of your two roads that diverge could be right, but maybe one option is more right than the other. Um, our bodies have a fight, a flight, and a freeze response whenever we're faced with a decision or a choice, right? So fight is when you want to address the situation head on to the confrontational people. That's you guys. Or there could be an aggressive or an unhelpful way, unless there's real danger, of course, right? So fight, we want to be a little careful with. Flight is when you want to run away and avoid this choice as much as possible, right? You're avoided. Those are the people who are like, I'm going to sit here and struggle and try and work through it myself, right? Those are the people who are afraid to ask for help. And then freeze is when we're faced with that situation and we're like, I don't even know what to do. That's kind of like that deer in the headlights moment because you're afraid of making the wrong decision. So it's just easier not to make one, period. So then you have to ask yourself, what is a wrong decision? What does that look like? What does being wrong or not being equipped mean for you? Does that mean this is going to take longer? This won't make me as happy. This could cost me more money, or maybe this could even make me vulnerable or impact somebody else, right? We're very, very aware creatures, right? Us as mammals, we love to be in packs and be in communities. And one thing we don't like at all is if a choice of ours negatively impacts somebody else, right? So when we're called to growth, right, whether to grow out of that imposter syndrome or even whether to grow and level up at work, we were given more responsibility, it's going to be uncomfortable. And I talked about that a little bit in the beginning. So growth typically isn't an easy thing, right? In order to grow, we need to learn. And then once you learn, you have to try. And everyone's like, okay, learning is great. I'm safe when I'm learning because then everyone expects me not to know. But when my knowledge is then put to the test in the trying, that's the hard part, because what if you're not good at it? What if you're bad? Or what if being wrong means impacting somebody else? So I'm not, I can see you nodding and be like, oh, okay, right? Like, so I can tell that I'm reaching people, which is great. And I don't want to make you more anxious as I'm talking about this. So I'm sure you're anxious to know, okay, well, all right, great, Gianna, I understand. How do I get rid of this? Right. So whether you're looking at it from a faith-based perspective or whether you're looking at it from just a humanistic perspective, we're not perfect, right? No one's perfect. People in the Bible are perfect. You and I aren't perfect, right? Even for people in certain professions who are expected to know everything, do everything, be everything, no one's perfect, right?
Hmm. Okay. So okay. I'm excited about what you just said. When you were saying, so I know like a lot of times I'm a journal writer and I try to do a lot of reflection. And when I peel away, what was it? Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, wasn't about money at all. It was about, but one of the things that stuck out were like the main fears that all humans have. And one of them was like fear of death. And I'm not sure if fear of loss, um, I'm not sure if fear of loss was one of them, but I feel like, you know how you say like whenever there's smoke, there's fire.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking like, okay, if I peel away all of the layers and if I keep saying like, because I do this with myself sometimes, I'll say, okay, well, if what I fear happens, what's going to happen? And what's going to happen if that happens? And
Right.
what's going to happen if that happens,
All the
right?
way.
And then like when I get to the root of it is I fear I'm going to lose the job. So if we're talking like specifically about um like a career choice or something like that, or someone who's afraid to apply for an interview, or someone who's afraid to start a business, it's ultimately like I'm afraid I'm going to get fired. Like I'm afraid I'm going to get fired. And then I'm like, well, what's going to happen if you get fired? And then that really becomes the root of it. It's like, because if I get fired, I'm not going to be able to pay my bills. I'm not going to be able to survive or take care of myself. And I'm going to starve to death and my house is going to go into foreclosure and I'm going to be homeless. But I mean, like, it may seem, but like I wasn't aware, like so many layers up, like when I'm just feeling the fear, I'm not aware that at the very, 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 very root of it, like whether it's me starting a business and the business flops, it's like, well, why is the business flopping so scary? Because ultimately, if it flops, then you can't financially take care of yourself.
Right.
And
Connect it back to you, and you then hold yourself responsible to not only say the business was a failure, but because my business was a failure, then I myself must be a failure, which is illogical thinking, right? You know, having a business, starting a business, being a part of a business is a lot of work. And there are so many factors externally to you that go into making a business successful. Yes, you can be the brains, but there's also a lot of other people in the community of having a business that makes it successful.
mhm. And then when we deal with the fear of loss, I think the fear of loss ultimately I feel like comes down to a fear you don't feel secure. And I think for me, like, and I really want you to tell me like what you feel about or what you know about this or think about this. But I feel like that lack of security is kind of where the faith meets the therapy. Cause like ultimately it feels like I'm afraid of the fate of what's going to become of me. Like, I'm afraid of I don't feel secure. Like, I don't feel taken care of. I don't feel like there's a safety net at the root of it. And sometimes I know, like, sometimes I feel like if we know so sometimes I think that's the applicable, like, I don't know, like, the applicable scenario of all things work together for my good, because it's like, or God will never leave me or forsake me. I feel like that kinda well, at least it helps me with imposter syndrome a little bit, because when I go down to the root of it, with me feeling like I'm gonna lose something, it's like, okay, but even if I lose it, just remembering that the job is not my source, ultimately God is. And He's kind of providing provision through the job at the time, but I can't put him in a box of just this job. He can provide provision from any job or anything, or you know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So again, whether it's something that we can control or we can't, God's hands are always in the mix, right? So we may see it as a failure. God can see it as, okay, this is a closed door, but let's also talk about the other doors that I can open for you, right? He's the only one who knows the plans, right? I will out myself. I'm a planner. I love to plan absolutely everything. When I have a plan, I feel safe and I feel secure. When I don't have a plan, I don't feel safe. I don't feel secure, right? But God always has his. And I wish we could know that. I do, right? I think that would make us all feel a lot better. But that's also the part about trusting in God as well. And is to make those decisions and also make those choices that may or may not end up the best for us, right? So understanding that, and I know you said kind of like, what was the title of the podcast series?
Oh, from detour to destiny.
From Detour to Destiny, right. So when we had spoken, I had told you that I think of God as a compass, right? He's not like someone who's, always in the driver's seat unless you tell him to take the wheel, right? But he's there to reroute you even when you've made a choice that maybe doesn't suit you, right? Or maybe wasn't the best choice or the most right choice, right? He always reroutes you back to his plan. But those detours in today's day and age, because everything is so fast paced, we see that as a waste of time. But it's not a waste of time. It's all a learning experience. So that way, not only you continue to trust in him, but hopefully you also begin to trust in yourself.
So if someone was rerouting themselves, let's say if we're helping someone reroute from imposter syndrome to what's on the other side of that, from imposter syndrome to
From being self actualized, knowing what you're capable of, and knowing what your areas of growth are going to be, right? We're never, ever going to be 100% ready for anything, right? Every day there is new information, there's new technology. And that's the beautiful thing, but also sometimes the overwhelming thing is there's always so much to learn, there's always so much to do. And it's about giving yourself that grace and compassion to learn it at a reasonable speed to where you don't become overwhelmed, you don't become burnt out. So that way, that fire and that passion that you have for that job, for that business, for that passion project is still there.
okay, so I want to ask this. When I go through your page, you have like these awesome grounding techniques.
Oh, yeah.
Like where you'll say, if you feel anxious, step one, do this, step two, do that, right? Can you walk us through like a grounding technique to overcome the anxiety we may feel if we're slipping into like that imposter syndrome space?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different options, right? There are three different categories for grounding techniques that I use. So one of them is mental, one of them is physical, and then one of them is a little bit more soothing, more emotional, right? So when you're starting to have self-doubt, that one typically like kind of has my ears go up to more of the soothing route because to me that's maybe someone not feeling enough, someone feeling inferior, and that's where we want to build confidence, right? Going back to that grace and to that compassion, right? So regulating through breath is always something that I start with grounding because if your head isn't clear, it's going to be really, really hard for you to ground. So typically I start off with 2 big inhales and exhales. So I'll repeat that twice. And
Okay, I'm
sometimes,
doing it. I'm doing it. I'm doing what you
oh,
said.
okay, yeah, you
Okay.
are. No,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Okay.
So one
Okay.
big breath in, out. One more big breath in and out. And for a little extra added measure, I like to kind of make a heart with my hands and I put it over where my heart space is. And I like to talk to myself as if I was kind of talking to a small child, right? So I like to say things that are empowering from my current self to my younger self. So words that are encouraging, like, you're doing the best that you can right now. You are here for a reason. You are meant to be here today. You have the light, the fire, the strength, the worth all within you to not only be able to grow, but to thrive and to succeed. And even though things are going to be a little uncomfortable right now, they're not going to be like this forever. And you can stay with your heart hands over your heart space and breathe and repeat those phrases to yourself as long as you need, because you're kind of giving yourself a little hug in that moment, right? And you can do this in public. You could go to, your office bathroom if you need to, or even go outside in your car, just turn the AC on because it's been very hot recently.
Right.
uh, and just make sure that you are filling up your cup enough so that you're able to pour out into other spaces.
That's awesome. Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to that you think would impact someone who is slipping into like that anxious self-doubt space or
Yeah, I mean, again, just to have scripture, right? I know a lot of people can benefit from that. And then if you're not faith-based, I could have some tips after that as well. But two scriptures that I really, really like for when you kind of feel like in that paralyzed position, right? That freeze mode. I love Philippians, right? Verses 6 through 7, to be anxious for nothing. By prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And it surpasses all understanding and will guard your heart and mind through Jesus Christ, right? Because you feel so vulnerable in that moment. You want God to guard your heart and your mind because it's almost like having that shield of love and that higher power above you. So I love Philippians 6 and 7, and even Proverbs chapter 19, verse 21. So many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. You can make many plans, but the Lord's purpose will prevail, right? So kind of like man plans and God laughs, so to speak. You can think you have it all figured out. Again, I outed myself as a planner beforehand. I love to plan, but my plans don't always work out. And that's okay, right? Because everything ends up working out other than that. For people who are not faith-based, I always try to incorporate maybe a mantra that they have. So kind of like the little engine that could, I think I can, I think I can, or even Finding Nemo, like just keep swimming, just keep anything that you can use to help motivate yourself, because anxiety, depression, imposter syndrome, they're going to make you feel like the feeling you have right now is going to be forever. And it's not. And I think a good way to practice that is to say, okay, what's easy for you now that maybe a year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago would have been difficult for you? Because that not only acknowledges your growth, but also that you can do hard things. You are capable of doing hard things, even if sometimes your mind can be really convincing that that's not true.
Mhm. Yes, and I would like to also say that what has helped me is just to find security in the fact that God God is the person who reinforces all of my weaknesses. So where I'm weak, that's where he's strong. I like the Bible verse too about the vessel where it talks about the cracks and it talks about the weak spots and it talks about God's spirit being like that gives God the opportunity to show his strength through the cracks that you have. So even in your imperfections, you're like perfectly made when you submit yourself to God's help and acknowledge that his help is there. Because it just kind of helps me to be like, okay, God, I don't know everything, but I know that you know everything and you can give me the answer or you can guide me to the answer. Or, hey, I may, if worst case scenario happens and I get fired or this business doesn't, um, oh no, or can you still see me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. I should have put my phone on Do Not Disturb. But what I was saying is like, even if I do get fired and the worst case scenario actually happens, then I just feel secure in knowing that I'm never, I'll never fall so far that you can't pick me up. And I'm never in a place where you're not providing for me. I think that's like one of those things that I would do, or one of those things that I would say, like when I practice the grounding technique. But what I want to do, because I'm like being mindful of the time, because I keep looking down, um, I want to have us end on a message. Like if you were giving someone a party message, well, let's not say if you were. Let's give those watching a party message so that they can better manage when they find themselves in a place of imposter syndrome, anxiety, and it's paralyzing them or making them um, run or right and not actually take on the task at hand. How can we get them over that hump? What would be your word to empower them to take action and to do whatever it is they're afraid of doing?
Yeah. So I would reinforce the idea that, no one is born ready. No one is born absolutely knowing everything. I think, again, you can look at other people who you inspire or who you were inspired by, right? So let's say you're even at a higher up position, right? You're always going to have role models and you're always going to have people who are underneath you. Think about the praise that you've gotten from people who maybe you supervise or who you manage, and then even think about some things that your higher ups have said to you, right? Even outside of that, thinking about people who you admire, maybe in, a musical sense, if you admire them in a sports sense, in a career sense, think about those qualities and those traits. And instead of comparing, right, because that's a deficit mindset, you're only focusing on the things that you're lacking, thinking of a growth based mindset to say, I really love, Shell's creativity. I love her ambition in being able to do this podcast, right? It could be anything. You say, how can I learn that from her? Or how can I learn that from someone else? How can I pray to God to grant me the strength to be able to be uncomfortable to learn those things? And then even once you've done that, once you've established where you would like to grow, think about the tools you already have to help you grow, right? So you know the plant that you want, but you got to get out the pot and the dirt and the shovel and the trowel and all that stuff. And luckily for you, you have that in your shed. You just have to, again, research kind of how you want to get to that next step. So it's all about gathering your tools, getting them together, and going forward. And if people want, they can take my little worksheet approach where you have one sheet where you list out your strengths in your relationships, another sheet where you list out the ones in your career and your profession, and then finally the strengths that you have in your hobbies, because then you have physical proof right in front of you that you get to look at. And sometimes people need to physically write things.
I love it. So I think that's perfect. And thank you so much for being a guest. And
Absolutely.
I feel like this episode will help a lot of people, which was like the ultimate goal. I feel like if you take Gianna's advice, even though this wasn't like a full personal one-on-one session, I still feel like she said a lot of things, especially the grounding. I felt good when I did that. That can get you to take action. So how would people follow your social media? And I know you're if people in your area want to reach out to your counseling center, like just give them that information. I want to post it in the video below, but your social media, the area you service, how people could reach out and contact your counseling service, you.
Yeah, absolutely. So probably through our Instagram is the easiest. So it's at Mosaic Counseling NJ, and you'll be able to find us. We're public, so as you scroll down and you see my videos that say "Grounding with G," you'll hit the right spot. And then people who are interested in learning more about me and about the practice, our website is also in the bio of the Instagram, and you can click there. And our number is also listed on the website if people are looking for consultations or sessions.
Thank you so much. And yes, I will make sure all of that stuff is listed below this episode so people can click and follow through. If you don't already follow Mosaic Counseling, I suggest you do because there's always good stuff on there that I love. there's always applicable things. I love when people have social media accounts that you can kind of look at the 1 minute, the post or the reel, and then you walk away with value. I feel like every post that I've seen adds value. So thank you so much for being here. And yes, so reach out to Mosaic Counseling, reach out to Gianna. And yeah, I hope that you were blessed in this episode.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here.
Of course.